Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's nice to see some SAFER members in the chat. I recognise some of the names of the organisations. For those who don't know about SAFER, I'm going to do just a brief sort of introduction to that first before we get on to what you've all come here to learn about today. So obviously, session aim today, going to develop how to effectively support your young volunteers. Obviously, you're all coming from different organisations, you'll all operate slightly differently. So obviously, this is kind of giving you a sort of wider sort of overview of the kind of things to consider. But I appreciate not everything might be relevant to everyone. But obviously, like we said, we've got questions we're going to cover at the end. So my background, I've sort of worked in safeguarding in every job I've ever had. I've been a safeguarding lead. I've worked up in CADS, dealing with tier 1 and tier 2 referrals. I used to be a further and higher education lecturer where I taught all the safeguarding children units from level 1 all the way up to degree level 7. So safeguarding has always been a big part of my life. Obviously, my current role is the SAFER Programme Coordinator. I provide a lot of advice and guidance to all our members on a variety of different aspects connected to safeguarding, as well as reviewing policies. You can submit your safeguarding policy to me to review if you're a SAFER member, as well as delivering training on safeguarding and keeping all our training courses updated. So that's a little bit about me. So the sort of main things we're going to cover in this session, we're going to look at the components that you need in your safeguarding policy, because from my perspective, that's your first initial building block of what you need to have in place to make sure that you're going to safeguard those volunteers. We're going to understand how you're going to support those volunteers once you've got them. You know, what steps do you need to put in place? Because it's not just your policy, it's actually making sure additional measures are added in, because at the end of the day, they are under 18, so actually they're still children. So you might have children and young people that you're delivering services to. The volunteers still need that same level of protection. So we're going to think about legislation and guidance and how to apply that. And then there's lots of wonderful sources of support in Norfolk who can support young people with a wide range of issues. So it might be you recognise something in one of your volunteers that they need some support on something. It's about that signposting and helping them get the support they need. It's not necessarily about you providing the support, but helping them to get it. So that's what we're going to look at. Like I said, though, firstly, I'm going to just do a little brief overview of SAFER for those of you who aren't members and might want to join if you feel that that would be beneficial to your organisation. Okay, so the SAFER programme is part of the Norfolk Safeguarding Partnership. Kind of unique to Norfolk. No one else has anything quite like it, so we're quite proud of that. And basically, like I said before, it's giving you advice, guidance and training on all matters connected to safeguarding children and young people. So there's lots of benefits of becoming a member. Like I said, there's already some members in the group. They might be able to say, joining. So you get advice and guidance off me. You can contact me over the phone. You can have a Teams call. Email advice. I sometimes go into organisations and do some direct work as well. We do free monthly safeguarding workshops on different topics. Like I said earlier, I can review your safeguarding policy once a year to make sure it's updated. We give you policy templates, as I appreciate policy writing is not the most interesting or easy thing to keep updated. If you become a member, you get access to our policy templates, which we update when a change happens or yearly, so you can adapt them and use them. If that wasn't enough, we actually give you 2 free training places on our introduction level course. So that benefit there actually mostly covers your membership fee we give back to you. So it's a good deal. Okay. Connected to that is the chance to achieve the SAFER certificate. So that's when you submit further policies and I accredit them, and then you get our logo and you get a certificate for a year. So that's quite a good thing to promote to families and other organisations you're working with that you've been accredited by the partnership. We have a monthly newsletter with updates. We have a Facebook group. We now have a LinkedIn page as well. And you get £10 off our multi-agency courses that the wider partnership delivers. So that's a little bit about that. So the scary part, the membership charges. We try to be affordable because obviously we want as many groups to be able to access our services as possible. So I'll let you read that yourself, but it's based on the annual turnover of your organisation. So it's either 30, 40 or £50. Okay, so it is a good deal. So we do deliver different safeguarding training, which either you can get your free places on, or if you're a member, you'll get that at a discounted rate, as opposed to if you were coming to do it when you weren't a member. So Introduction to Safeguarding Children, that's the course we say everybody should do, including volunteers, obviously not volunteers under 18, but other volunteers. Core programme is more detailed for those with specific safeguarding responsibilities. Obviously, you designate a safeguarding person. We do safer recruitment training, and an important one because of obviously the Online Safety Act, we do online safety course as well. So you'll get a copy of these slides. So if you do want to join, or you want more information, all the contact information is there, and you can fill a membership form out on our website if you do want to join. So that's just a little bit of a hard sell about SAFER, and I will now move on to what you're all here actually wanting to hear. Okay, so like I said, we're going to start with just thinking about a safeguarding policy. We're not going to cover that in depth because that is a sort of thing in its own right, but it's important for you to make sure that you've got an up-to-date safeguarding policy in place, which covers all the essential sections that are needed, because part of your responsibility to safeguard children and young people is making sure the correct policies and procedures are in place. So why do you think, oh, is it showing my notes? That's helpful. Can you see my notes, Charlotte, or not?
No, I can't see your notes.
Oh, that's okay. I can see the notes. I'm just checking that everybody can see because I'm giving them the answers. So why do you need a safeguarding policy? Any ideas? You can put your hand up and tell me, or you can put it in the chat. Why do we need it? What, you know, why are we here today? Why is it important? Oh, I've stunned them into silence already. It's a good start.
It ensures that you've got a consistent approach to safeguarding across your service.
Fantastic answer, Catherine. Yeah, wonderful. What else have we got? We've got some in the chat. To protect children, yeah, consistency and clarity. Again, wonderful. Consistency to protect young people, to protect children. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, perfect. To keep our young volunteers safe and protect, lovely. To protect staff and volunteers. Yeah, really good point, Sally, because I think sometimes that gets forgotten. You know, yes, it's about the children, but it's also making sure that, you know, your staff and volunteers are protected, because obviously, you know, if you haven't got the right procedures in place, a staff member could be put in a vulnerable position and then an allegation might be made against them because that correct procedure wasn't in place. Protect organisation and be in line with the law, absolutely. Yeah, like we do have a legal obligation, keeping everyone safe, clearing the roles to protect ourselves. Wonderful. Well, that's good. Fantastic. Okay, so for me, I do spend a lot of my time checking policies for safer members. It can be quite a lengthy process. So for me, there's sort of specific things I'm looking for when I'm checking a policy. Having a clear layout is really good, because obviously you should be sharing your policy with parents. You should be sharing your policy with volunteers and staff. So it needs to be clear so it's easy for people to understand and read. Headings is really good, you know, so it breaks it down into the key sections. Personalised. Tell me what happens in your organisation. A lot of the time I will read a policy and it's very generic. It doesn't actually say, in our setting, we do this. I sometimes have even had policies submitted to me what don't contain Norfolk procedures. For instance, if your organisation is a national organisation, I've had policies submitted to me with Norfolk with Doncaster procedures in. So what use is that to your local branch? You know, you need to know what the procedures are in Norfolk. So really clear section on what to do if there's a safeguarding concern. Sometimes there's a lot of extra text in there, and the sort of clear information of what to do is often missed because there's a lot of extra information what perhaps could be condensed and isn't needed. So like I said, Norfolk procedures, I expect to see the procedure for contacting the LADO, the local authority designated officer. So if there's an allegation about a staff member, I expect to see that. And I also expect to see what you do when you contact the Children's Advice and Duty Service, which we're going to talk about a bit more in a minute. And updated when changes happen. I still see policies what have the Data Protection Act with the old date of 1993. It was updated in 2018. So even little changes like that, when your legislation is updated, change the dates on it. You know, Now the Online Safety Act came in at the end of last year. Your safeguarding policy should now have a bit in on online safety as well. Often that's missed as well. So it's being sure you're continually keeping updated. If you become a safer member, obviously we give you a monthly newsletter of what changes are happening, both locally and nationally. In terms of Norfolk especially, there's been a lot of changes recently in early help and sort of what services are out there. And I'm still seeing safeguarding policy saying the Norfolk Threshold Guide is what we use for safeguarding concerns. That is gone. Now we have the continuum of need guidance. So it's just making sure that you're up to date so that you've got everything in place to keep the children and young people safe. Okay, so these are the 10 essential sections that I would expect to see in your safeguarding policy. Most of these sections are often not included, or they're not included clearly. Like I said, we're not going to go into the contents of those today. We're only going to look at safer working practices and how that applies to young people. But if you've got your policy and it's due for an update, take that slide away and make sure that you've got those headings. I'm briefly going to talk about that. But if you do become a safer member, we do deliver a workshop completely on writing a safeguarding policy, and you would get access to our templates. So really important, at the start of your policy, I want to know who that person is for reporting that safeguarding concern to. Your designated safeguarding person, or it could be designated safeguarding lead, it could be safeguarding lead practitioner, it doesn't matter on their name, but just tell me who they are. So really important, on that first page, the contact details and the name of your safeguarding lead. Quite often that'll be in the middle of the policy, it might be at the end, it might not be there at all. Really important information. Have that on the front page. If that policy is on your notice board, you can quickly read that and see who you need to report to. Key information. And again, have the contact number for them. And also, obviously, if the DSP isn't available, who is the next person in the chain to contact? Obviously, there could be a deputy. So really important that that information is there. Connected to that is setting out what the roles and responsibilities are of the designated safeguarding person. They normally should be the one who obviously keeps the policy updated or is involved in that process. Obviously, they're the ones that you report all your concerns to. They should make sure that all the staff and volunteers have got awareness of the policy and how to report the concerns, e.g. is a form filled out, you know, what the process is, because that's key information that everybody needs to know. So connected to that, safer working practices for staff and volunteers. So that's considering things such as DBS checks, that sort of early stage of the safer recruitment. Do you carry out interviews? You know, do they fill out an application form? Is there a code of conduct they have to follow? So really important, you have to have extra safer working practices for the volunteers under 18. And we're going to come on to that in detail in a moment. So it's just thinking about what extra steps are you putting in to make sure it's extra safe for those under 18s. Again, importantly, contacting the Children's Advice and Duty Service, setting out what that procedure is. There is a CADS flow chart that should be in your policy. If anybody needs that, that can be sent out with the slides for this. That kind of sets out what the process is, what you should do first. Do you ask for consent of the parent, in what situations? Then really importantly, types of abuse. It could be an appendix in the policy, but it should be mentioned in the policy. These are the types of abuse. More information can be found at the end. So Working Together to Safeguard Children 2023, because it's been updated, sets out the 4 main types of abuse. But then, as we're aware, things are changing in the world. There's a lot of extra safeguarding things to consider now, such as female genital mutilation, child exploitation, prevent and radicalisation. Again, they're all things to talk about in your safeguarding policy. So really important connected to safeguarding is setting out if an allegation is made against a staff member or a volunteer, what is your process for that internally and externally? Obviously, I did mention earlier, you should contact the LADO and report that, but also setting out, obviously, if the allegation is made about your safeguarding lead, well, they can't report themselves to the LADO, so it's thinking about who is the next person in the chain to take on that if necessary. A bit that's often missed out of policies is the working with parents and carers, which is really important because obviously parents need to be made aware of your safeguarding policy. They also need to be made aware that you have a legal duty to report safeguarding concerns about their child if they arise. And also parents need to be made aware that if you think the child's at significant risk of harm, you don't need their consent to pass on those safeguarding concerns. So often I recommend to organisations to have that kind of in your organisation registration form for the children, those kind of statements, and then a tick box so the parents are ticking to say that, yes, we've been made aware of that. We've been made aware of where the safeguarding policy is if we want to read it, just to cover yourselves. So really important to have a section on records and confidentiality in your policy. What safeguarding records do you keep? Where do you keep them? Who has access to them in the organisation? How are they kept secure? Also thinking about, again, yes, some information that parents and young people give you is confidential, but also setting out when the confidentiality can be broken. Again, if there's a safeguarding concern at risk of harm, obviously you can break confidentiality and share those records with CADS or the police or whoever you need to. So again, important to have that in there. And the last bit, like I said a bit earlier, online safety. So I think when we think about online safety, most people just instantly think I'm talking about, you know, being on the internet, but it's wider than that. So it's thinking about what your rules are on staff and volunteer usage of their mobile phones, because obviously they can access the internet on them. There's thinking about smartwatches that might be able to access the internet and potentially show harmful content to young people. So it's thinking about not just your own devices in the setting, but, you know, are your volunteers allowed to, you know, connect to your Wi-Fi in their break times and use the internet? You know, are young people able to bring their mobile phones into the setting and connect to your internet and potentially show content to others that they shouldn't be showing? It's thinking about what steps you can put in place to keep them safe. Okay, so they're the sections that I'd be looking for. So like I said, now we're going to go on and think about specifically what safe work and practice will look like for under 18s and what kind of things you could bring in, and then you would add that into your policy to say that you're going to do this. Okay. Okay, so as I've said, you know, because they're under 18, you need to have extra measures in place compared to what you would have for normal staff members and normal volunteers. So you need to clearly have a section within your policy headed safer work and practices for under 18s. So you should already have a safer work and practices section, but make sure there's an additional section that sets out what extra things you've got in place for the young people. Okay, so there's some examples here of things to think about. So obviously, I don't know if you've already got volunteers under 18 already, or whether some of you are now thinking about doing that. So you might be in different sort of positions, but it's really important if you're going to start having volunteers, is thinking about the pre-selection considerations. So, you know, if you've not had young volunteers in your organisation before, you know, are you going to have to make adaptations, you know, so it's possible for them to volunteer? You know, are you going to have to make any reasonable adjustments to perhaps the way you do things so that they will be able to, you know, successfully volunteer and, you know, be able to do a specific skill or a specific task? Connected to that is obviously thinking about, you know, if children want to come and volunteer with you and they have special educational needs, learning difficulties or some kind of disability, you know, can the role that you want them to do be adapted in a way so that they can participate? Because obviously if we think about the Equality Act 2010, obviously, you know, you've got to make sure that you're inclusive and you're not discriminating against them. So it's thinking in that early stage, you know, what can we do if a child comes to us and wants to volunteer, you know, and they do perhaps have an additional or reasonable adjustment we need to make. So it's thinking about that from that sort of early point. Really good practice, and it's good practice for the young person as well, is to do an informal interview with them as you would when you had any normal staff or volunteers. Yes, it doesn't have to be quite, you know, the formal extent you would, but it's a good opportunity for you to get to know the person and also for them to get to know you, and also kind of what the role will be, and they can ask any questions. And also that might be a good opportunity for you to think, oh, actually, I haven't considered that bit. You know, there's a bit more here perhaps we need to do before this young person can start with us. Really important. Obviously, young people under 18 will need their own risk assessments. So hopefully you've already got risk assessments in your organisation anyway for specific things. Young people under 18, there's more risks associated with them because obviously their level of maturity or immaturity, you know, they might have never have done anything, you know, like this before. Is thinking about, again, you know, if it's a role where perhaps they need to use equipment, have you got to get in, you know, like lighter weight equipment that a younger person can hold, you know, and use. So it's thinking about what you can do to make sure the risks are minimized if they're going to be volunteering with you. Obviously, it's things as well, you know, if the public can access your site, how are you going to make sure that young person, which comes in the next point, isn't left alone with members of the public? Again, obviously making sure your young people are not left alone to supervise other children or included in any ratios, because obviously they're still children themselves. So that's really important to make sure that they're not put in any vulnerable positions. Again, making sure that they're not left alone with any staff who are not DBS checked, because obviously if you're a big organisation, you know, you might have a member of staff in the office perhaps who hasn't got a DBS check, whereas obviously your staff on the ground working with children and young people have. So making sure that that young person is protected. So it's, again, all that would tie into the risk assessment as well. So it's thinking about making sure you've got all those steps in place to minimise risk of harm. Okay, so really important, obviously, hopefully you've already got codes of conduct in place already. It's really important to have a code of conduct for your volunteers under 18, because obviously expectations on them may be slightly different, but it's still important to have that and share that with them when they first start with you. And again, get them to sign it like you would normal staff and volunteers, because that's showing their commitment to it. And also you sit down with them and talk them through it, because, you know, there might be language in it that they don't understand what that means. So it's being really open with them. Okay, so really important, they need to be aware of safeguarding when they're with you, but of course you've got to adapt that to make that suitable for their age level. So, you know, a lot of safeguarding policies I look at, you know, are potentially 20 pages long and obviously have detailed information on types of abuse. Of course, we don't want you to really share that with a young person, because obviously that could cause them distress reading information like that. So it's making sure that you produce a sort of safeguard and key statement or summary policy document, which just has the key information that they need to keep them safe for their role volunteering with you. So things, you know, if you see something that worries you, or if another child and young person tells you something of concern, you know, you need to go to this person in the organisation. You know, it doesn't have to be a lot. It's just making sure that they know if something doesn't feel right, that they can report it to so-and-so. Okay. So, connected to that is making sure you've got a suitable support system in place. And we're going to break some of these down in further detail in a little while. But of course, young people are going to need more support, guidance, supervision, direction than perhaps other staff and volunteers. So it's making sure, you know, there is a named allocated person, you know, who's going to be supporting your volunteers under 18 throughout the process that they're with you. For consistency, it would be good if it's the same person or at least two named people, so they, you know, they can build that relationship with them. I think I already touched on this one again, providing suitable equipment to make sure that they can actually achieve it, the voluntary role you want them to do, because there's nothing worse than them starting with you and, you know, we've already got hurdles and they can't do that. So they're the safer working practices examples of things you could consider bringing in to your practice to support the children and young people. We're going to cover some of these in more detail as we move on. So because obviously in some of your organisations, the children and young people are already there and the young people, volunteers, are going to be around those children and young people, sometimes a child is more likely to perhaps disclose abuse to someone who is closer to their age. So something else you need to consider is setting out kind of what your procedure or what your approach is going to be if your young volunteer comes to you with a disclosure from another child in your organisation. Okay, because it could happen. Because like I said, you know, it might be, you know, that young person reaches out to another young person because, you know, they feel a closer connection. So it's thinking about how you would approach that. So to be honest, it's very similar to how you would deal with a child telling you a disclosure, because like I said, they are still a child, but it's just making sure that you've got something set out. Again, you could have this in your safeguarding policy under the disclosure sections, making sure that you've thought about this because it could happen. And also, because they're a young volunteer, it's thinking about what support you're going to put in after if they have come to you and giving you that information from another child. So obviously, you know, react calmly, obviously giving them time to speak and saying it in their own words. So very similar to how you just deal with a normal disclosure. Obviously listen to them and provide the reassurance that they've done the right thing in telling you. Obviously you can ask open-ended questions, but not too many, because, you know, they're probably going to feel quite anxious, you know, unsettled, you know, distressed. Really important, obviously, making that record of the conversation and repeating back to the young person, this is what you said, is that how you meant, you know, just to make sure, you know, you've got everything clear. Really importantly, then be honest about what you're going to do next. And obviously, because they're still under 18, obviously get their parent in to come in and just say, you know, something has been disclosed to your young person, you know, let's see what we can do now to support them moving forward. And it's thinking about, you know, they might need to take a break from volunteering for a little while because, you know, it's hard enough for an adult to deal with a disclosure from a child, yet alone a child dealing with a disclosure from a child. Thinking about what support you can offer the young person. That might involve, with the parents' agreement and the young person's agreement, perhaps a referral to another organisation. We're going to look at those later, different types of support for young people. And obviously thinking about if they do return to you to volunteer after this, what sort of extra support are you going to put in initially to support them to return? It might be, you know, perhaps considering a different role in the organisation to start with, where perhaps they're not having direct contact with children and young people, if that's possible. So it's really important just to think about that, because that could happen in your organisation. Okay, have we got any questions so far? Are we doing okay, everybody? I appreciate it's a lot of information. I can see a few smiles, so that's good. That's good. I can't see anyone asleep yet, so that's always good. Okay, so now we're going to move on to looking at supporting them in more detail. Okay, so I would say we sort of covers 5 main areas. Some of these we've already touched on briefly, but these measures I would recommend you implement for anybody who's having any volunteers under 18, because it's really important, because all this connects to safer working practices. Okay, so yes, you've got your safeguarding policy, but it's not just the policy, that's what you're going to continually have in place throughout their journey with you. So we're going to look at each one in turn, but it's obviously thinking about induction and training, because, you know, they should have an induction and training just like any other staff member or volunteer would. Just because they're under 18 doesn't make any difference. They still need something tailored to meet their needs. So really important, like I said earlier, supervision and support, a defined role so they know what they're going to be doing and understand what's required, risk assessments and parental permission. Because remember, they are still under 18. So you've still got to make sure parents are knowing what they're going to be doing. So we think about induction. I would say key things to cover is obviously, like I said earlier, a bit of an overview about safeguarding, letting them meet, you know, who your safeguarding lead is, and they understand, you know, if they're worries about themselves or a child, you know, they know who to go to. A little bit about what the rights and responsibilities are in the role they're going to be doing. Obviously talk a little bit about boundaries, a little bit about health and safety, because obviously you want to make sure that they're keeping themselves safe when they're with you. Obviously communication in terms of, you know, who they can talk to if they need anything, and a little bit about dealing with difficult situations, which obviously can tie in with dealing with, yeah, you'll be getting a copy of the slides, a little bit tying in with what they do if a child or someone else reported something unsettling to them. So really important, clear information on who to go to if they have concerns about their own or someone else's well-being. So I would recommend perhaps creating a sort of like a little welcome pack or like an induction pack, what sort of sets out some of that key information. So because young people, it's going to be overwhelming for them. It's going to be a lot of information to take in. If they've got, you know, a pack that they can refer to throughout their volunteering with you, they've got that key information to hand if they don't remember it all, because, you know, I'm sure we're all like that when you start a new job. There's so much to take in. It's good if they can refer back to it. And some like some jobs as well, when you start, you know, there's little tasks in there of information you need to find out. You could perhaps create a whole booklet, what gives them a little bit of perhaps having to talk to different people in the organisation and sort of finding out a bit for themselves, sort of empowers them as well. Obviously, like I said earlier, relevant policies need to be shared, but I recommend that that's in a summary form. You know, they need to know about how to keep themselves safe. They need to know specific hazards in your organisation, if there are any, and kind of how they should be approaching certain situations. Obviously, connected to the induction and training would be the code of conduct I talked about earlier. That would be a good opportunity to introduce that to them. Really important, they need to know what support and supervision that they're going to get during the volunteering, because you know, they're given their time, so you should be investing in them and making sure that they're getting just as much out of it as you are. Making sure that they know what they're going to be doing. And also I would suggest a mini sort of safeguarding training session suitable for their age and understanding. That could be with your safeguarding lead. It wouldn't need to be particularly long, perhaps sort of 15 minutes, 20 minutes, just sort of talking about, you know, a bit about, you know, if you see anything like this, come to us. If this happens, follow this procedure. If you're ever worried, you can come to this, and just a little bit about abuse, but not in any kind of detail. Just say, you know, sometimes children and young people experience abuse and harm. You know, as you're going to be working with them, sometimes they might want to tell you what's happening. If that happens, then come to us. So like I said, it's only at a very basic level, but I still think it's good for them to have a little bit of an internal safeguarding training session. Really important, making sure that you complete important sort of registration paperwork like you would when you have other staff and volunteers. Obviously, you're going to want an emergency contact. You need to know if the young person got any medical conditions, any allergies, if they're on any medication, because they might need to bring that and keep that somewhere securely in your organisation. Sort of if they've got any learning difficulties, additional needs, it's really good to make sure that information's collated on the sort of registration or application form, so that you've got all that information and then you can sort of plan accordingly. So that's that one. So connected to that is obviously the supervision. So you're going to make sure that you've got that consistent level of supervision for them at all times. You're going to need that so that, you know, that they're kept safe. You know, if you don't feel that you've got, you know, suitable staff or someone who can do that, then you really need to consider whether having young volunteers, you know, is right for you at this time, because this all connects into your duty to keep them safe. So there should be a named person allocated to oversee and supervise their work, who the young people can go to at any time for support. So if you've got young volunteers coming in on a set day and that's consistent, you should always make sure there's at least one named person that they can go to. That's why it's beneficial to have two people, so that if one's not in, the other one is around. Because obviously the worst thing for them is if something comes up and the only people around are people they don't know, and they keep that to themselves. It could be, like I said, we're thinking about perhaps disclosures from other children, but also thinking about the young person themselves. Something that might have happened in their home life, and they might want to offload that to someone. If they're two named people who they've got that relationship with aren't available, then they might contain that themselves and then not pass that on. So again, we've talked a little bit about this, but obviously the supervision level is going to be about the maturity of the young person, because obviously some young people are very mature, whereas perhaps older young people are not. So again, a lot of that is you're going to have to get to know your young person to sort of see what level of support they need. Like I said earlier, making sure that those named supervisors have a DBS check so that they're safe and suitable to be with the young person, and making sure that a plan is set for the supervision that is regular and consistent. You know, it could be, you know, once, depending on how long they're in, it could be, you know, once a week at the end of the volunteering session. You know, there's a planned catch-up supervision with their named supervisor, you know, so that they can talk about, you know, how they're getting on and what they're struggling with as well. Okay, and really importantly, if there are any concerns, could be, you know, they're struggling with the role, you know, that you're going to put in whatever support you can, or perhaps review what they're doing and see if they can do something else if it's not working out. Because again, we think about this, it's also about their well-being as well and their mental health, and that does connect to obviously safeguarding them, you know, as a whole. So okay, so connected to that is support, because obviously, yes, supervision is a bit more formal, you know, having the named person to go to, but you know, we need to make sure there's a supportive environment for them. You've got to think these young people may have never been in the working environment before, so you know, it could all be new for them. It could be overwhelming. It's really beneficial perhaps if you've already got existing volunteers or experienced staff. One of them could be allocated as a buddy for the young person. That works very well. Making sure that, you know, yes, you've got your formal supervision booked in, but always making the young person aware, oh, we haven't got a supervision book today, but if you want to come and speak to me at any time, my door's always open. Just just making that sort of reassurance there, there's always someone they can go to. And letting them contribute their own ideas. So obviously it might not be feasible depending on when you have them in the day, but if you have a team meeting and young people happen to be around at that time, it's really positive to get them in your team meeting so they can sort of share ideas and also sort of learn about team meetings and how things work. So that empowers them and makes them feel more valued, because obviously we're thinking, you know, they've got to get something beneficial out of the experience as well. So that's support. So a defined role. Okay, so as I was saying, just like having a job description for your normal jobs, it's making sure that you've got a clearly defined role for the young person, so that, you know, there's no surprises, and also making sure that you're getting the right fit young person for your organisation as well. So things to consider are obviously going back to the safeguarding, making sure it's safe and suitable for their age level. And also, you know, if the role perhaps isn't the most interesting or stimulating, it's thinking about, you know, are they going to be doing that all the time? Is there other sort of things they can be doing as well? Because obviously we all know young people, they'll soon tell you if they're bored and you know, and they don't want to do it. So it's making sure, you know, it's going to be interesting and engaging, you know, and also suitable for their attention span, because obviously, you know, we all know that they can get bored quite easily. So it's thinking about that and thinking about, you know, perhaps in the morning they'll do this, perhaps in the afternoon they'll do something slightly different if you're having them for that amount of time. So thinking about adaptations that can be made, and also physical and psychological capacity, making sure that, you know, it's actually achievable for them. That's where your regular supervisions come in, because, you know, that's when you can then make adaptations actually. If the young person's saying, oh, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm not enjoying that, then you can make changes. Because like I said, this is an ongoing process, but it's obviously trying to get that role established at the outset. So when they come for their interview, you know that they clearly know what the expectation is. So your role description, obviously set out what tasks they're going to do, obviously the location, the time commitment, you know, is the volunteer in, you know, 2 hours a day, you know, once a week, you know, what is it you're going to want them to do? Because obviously older volunteers, you know, they potentially give more of a time commitment, because we're going to come on to sort of legislation in a little while. But obviously younger children, you've got to think, you know, they've still got obviously a lot of studying and education as well. So what skills and qualities they need, that's really good to have that in the role description, because that really starts to then sort of start their development for later life and help them sort of recognise what skills that they've got. Who they'll be working with, because obviously if the role does involve working with other children and young people, let them know that, because that might not be for all young people. They might not want to work alongside other young people, so that's really good to be upfront with that. Let them know what supervision, training, induction they're going to get, because that's showing your investment to keep them safe. Who the named contact they'll be for safeguarding, and obviously that sort of safeguarding summary statement could be attached to the job role, because obviously that job role they'll probably share with their parents potentially as well. So it's really good that you've got that safeguarding commitment in there so the parents can see that. Okay, so that's that one. So then we're going to think about risk assessments. So we touched on this briefly already, but obviously you should have a risk assessment specifically for volunteers under 18. Okay, because obviously there's always a risk that young volunteers could be exploited in the workplace, you know, by doing too many hours that they're not meant to do, doing tasks that aren't age appropriate. Again, think about emotional impact of perhaps doing tasks that they haven't done before, extra pressure at exam time. So it's always thinking about making sure that you've got your priorities correct. Obviously, the risk assessment should be available for the volunteer to view. Obviously, again, that would be really good to share that perhaps during the induction, where you can sort of explain it to them so they understand. Should also be available for the parent of the child to view if they want to. So again, it's being open and transparent and letting the parents know that you've thought about their child and you want to keep them safe. So obviously, I'm sure you've already got risk assessments already in your organisations. But obviously for the young people, it's obviously thinking about the layout of your workplace. Some of that is, you know, is there going to be areas perhaps where members of the public are coming in, where the child, you know, young person could be exposed to risk? Is there areas in the workplace perhaps what are not as well seen as other areas? And again, a young person could be out of sight. It's thinking about perhaps your positioning of where they'll do the role. to keep them safe. What types of work equipment they'll be using, if any. Again, really, we've talked about this already, but we're coming back to that psychological and physical immaturity and inexperience, that they are going to be risks for your young person. So again, part of that to minimize those risks is making sure, someone is supervising them at all times. It's a staff member who's got a DBS check. Again, they're the sort of steps of how to minimize that risk. Control measures you'd put in place, like I've just said, and what age group you feel, the role is actually achievable for. It might be in your organisation, you have one role, what 15-year-olds do, and that you have a slightly different role which is suitable for 13-year-olds. So it's just thinking about making sure that you have risk assessed it based on their age and if it's appropriate. And a really important point, if you've done your risk assessment and you still feel it's still not suitable for them and you can't control the risks enough, then obviously do not allow them to volunteer. Or consider, can they do something different to what you planned? There's nothing worse than, going ahead if you feel it's still unsafe to do so. Okay, so really important. Obviously, they are still children.
Oh, we've got a question, Gemma.
Oh.
Regarding risk assessment, so I thought I'd bring it up now. And it says, should we do risk assessments per volunteer?
Okay, Megan. So generally, I would say, if you're going to have volunteers in sort of different age ranges, I would do a risk assessment grouped in terms of ages. So say if you were going to have 13 to 14-year-olds, 15 to 16-year-olds, I would group it by age. Or if you had a specific young person who perhaps had a lot of additional needs, perhaps SEND, a learning disability or some kind of severe health condition, I would do obviously a risk assessment for them in their own right. But generally, or you could have your risk assessment for your under 18s, have one, but then if you think you need to put extra measures in, if you have a 13-year-old as opposed to a 16-year-old, just make that clear in the columns that for 13-year-olds, we would put this extra measure in. For 16-year-olds, we feel we do not need to put that measure in. Does that help? Okay, so like I said, parental permission obviously is really important. So you've got to make sure that you're letting the parents know that this young person is going to be volunteering with you. So under 16s, you want to get signed parental consent to confirm the parent is happy with their child becoming a volunteer. And then that's that opportunity to share that key information, what their child's going to be doing, when they're going to be doing it, and also sharing your safeguarding policy information with them. So if you hold it on a website, or you could just say, if you want to see our safeguarding policy, it can be made available to you. And really important in that sort of introduction letter you sign where you're getting the parental consent, put in there who the parent can contact if they've got any concerns about their young person's well-being when they're doing the volunteering. Okay, so it's making sure that the parents have got that information as well. So in terms of over 16s, obviously I'd say consider the young person's individual circumstances to determine if you feel you still need to obtain parental consent. Obviously, perhaps if they're not at the level of where you feel a typical 16-year-old is, or perhaps if there's a learning difficulty, then I would definitely obviously say still get parental consent in that situation. If you feel that they're competent enough that they can give consent themselves, I would still let the parents know that they're volunteering with you. So not get the consent, but have the courtesy to share that with the parents and just say, just to let you know, so-and-so is now going to be starting volunteering with us. If you have any questions or any concerns, please contact us on this number. So that way you've still empowered the young person to come and seek the volunteering opportunity with you, but you're also still covering yourselves to let the parents know that they're going to be doing it with you. Because in most cases, parents still have legal responsibility up to the age of 18, but obviously that's not always the case because some children are in the care system and things like that. So obviously connected to the parental permission is making sure, we did talk about this earlier, getting the parents' contact details, getting that emergency contact information so that if anything happens to the young person, you know who to contact, and connected with the parental permission ages we've got there. If you want to take photos and videos of your young volunteers, obviously doing activities with you or to promote what they do, obviously, again, you'll need to get parental permission for that as well, based on the ages there. So it's just making sure, again, that could all be covered in the sort of same letter that you sent out to the parents. It's really important to get that in place before the young person starts with you, because obviously if they start and you haven't got the emergency contact information or the parents' details and something happens, then obviously you've not safeguarded that young person. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the section which everybody enjoys, safeguarding law and guidance. It's always a very popular topic for people. Okay, so interestingly, you'll find probably this quite interesting. So there's actually no actual legal laws in place regarding children doing volunteering under 18. However, there is legislation for children who are working in a paid capacity. So we're going to think about that and applying it, because it's deemed good practice to follow the same guidance as if they were being employed. Okay, so a child, obviously defined as anyone who's not yet reached their 18th birthday. So volunteering opportunities should not place unfair demands on the young person. It should only involve suitable tasks and roles. So if you've considered all the stuff we've already talked about, you should hopefully not be putting the young person in that position. So let me just... Okay, so we're now going to look at the actual law, what's out there. So obviously child employment law guidance for you to consider. Like I said, I would apply these principles to your volunteers, because like I said, if it's recognised that it's good enough for children who are being paid, I still feel it should apply to those who are volunteering. So children must be aged 13 or over. I do think that that's good practice not to have any volunteers under 13. So must not be employed before 7 AM or after 7 PM. That sort of consideration is in place because obviously these children are still going to be in school. Must not be employed for more than 2 hours on any school day or a Sunday. Can only work 1 hour before the start of school. May only work a maximum of 12 hours per week in term time. Must have a break of at least 1 hour after 4 hours work. That's really important, making sure if your young people are doing a day with you that you've timetabled in adequate breaks. Again, depending on their age, they might need more often breaks. You know, you've just got to think that actually they're going to all be different, so they might need a bit of flexibility. Okay, must have at least 2 weeks free from employment during the school holidays. Children can only start full-time work once they've reached the minimum school leaving age. Well, that's a bit different now, because obviously that they've changed that you can leave school obviously on the last Friday in June that you'll be 16, but then you have to legally do one of the following until you're 18. You now have to be in full-time education, such as college, start an apprenticeship, or spend 20 hours or more a week working or volunteering while in part-time education or training. So they'll still have to be in some kind of education or training even when they leave school now. So it's just bearing all that in mind. Like I said, this is the law for paid children under 18. But like I said, it's still really good practice to make sure that you're following that as safer working practices. So like I said, this law doesn't apply, but I would recommend that you follow that because it's a sort of benchmark. And I find it strange that there is no actual law in place for volunteers under 18, but we shall see. Okay, so sort of connected to legislation and guidance.
Gemma, we've got a comment. I just thought I'd bring it up because
sorry.
it's in relation to what you chatted about. So Alice says, would it be fair to argue that it's reasonable for them, I'm assuming young people, to be volunteering at a youth club that runs until 8 PM? The children at our groups are aged 8 to 11, and we have a teenager volunteering at it. The group finishes at 8 PM.
Yeah, I mean, Alice, how long have you had that young person volunteering with you? And what night is your youth club?
So it is a school night. It's she's our Thursday group. She's 16. She's been volunteering for about a year now. But And I get the not employing after 7 p.m, but I think because the groups, I mean, it's a group the following week she attends because it's for her age group.
Yeah.
So, and parents are happy for her to be out until 8 or when she gets home after that. So
I would say it's completely acceptable, Alice. It's not, I don't have any concern about that. You know, they're 16, you know, they're not, I would say perhaps if they were on the younger age, you know, if they were perhaps 13, it might need some consideration. You've already got the parental agreement, so it's absolutely fine. Like I said, this you know, this isn't legally binding. It's just good guidance to consider in your working practices. Would be
I
my
just think because
advice.
we run groups for young
Well,
people
yes.
beyond 7 p.m. that they
So
attend
if
for
they,
fun
if
and
they
the
can come in their
volunteering.
personal capacity as a member, then yes, then exactly what is the difference to them volunteering? So no, I think it's fine. Like I said, that is kind of best practice. But yes, a lot of organisations for volunteering are in evenings. So I think as long as you've got the parental agreement and the young person is happy, then it's absolutely fine.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
And Julia's got their hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we finished our 7:30, but our young volunteers, so they attend from year 6s to year 9, and then year 10 they become young volunteers. So it's at the minute it's fortnightly, and we run 7 till 8:30.
Yeah. So again, similar to Alice, Julia, as long as you've got, you know, safer working practices already in place, like I've talked about for the young volunteers. Like I said, the stuff on this slide is only guidance. If you've got the parental consent, then that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, so we're now going to think about DBS checks, which is a minefield in its own right. So obviously your staff working with 16 to 17-year-olds will still need a DBS check. I think often people think, oh, they're over 16 now, it's fine. No, in the eyes of the law, they're still a child under 18. So obviously if they're working with staff, they still need that DBS check. Interestingly as well, obviously if you've got 16 and 17-year-olds working with under 18s, they should have their own DBS check. Okay, but obviously that can obviously be problematic. What do you think might be the problem of getting a 16 and 17-year-old to have a DBS check?
ID.
Yes.
Lack of ID. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I used to work at the college, and I used to do all the DBS checks for all the childcare students. So yes, especially the college I was at was in a deprived area. So you know, parents having money to get photo ID in terms of a provisional or a passport for a young person was very challenging. And obviously a lot of them never had birth certificates either, you know, didn't have obviously don't have a utility bill in the name. So it's a really tricky thing. So again, I'm just giving you what the guidance is. I recognise that not all these things are possible. Obviously, if it's not possible, it's making sure you're risk assessing and you're putting things in place to minimise that risk. Okay, and obviously if they're under 16 and volunteering with you, they can't have a DBS check done on them anyway because they have to be over 16. Again, making sure that supervision and support is in place. Okay, so like I said, DBS checks are a bit of a minefield. However, we do have the contact details for someone who is an expert on DBS checks, and that is Georgie Mitchell, and she is the regional outreach advisor for DBS in this region, and she is fantastic. So if you do have any queries about DBS checks for your staff, for your volunteers, for your 16 and 17-year-old volunteers, Georgie is the best person to contact. Her email address is there, and you'll get these slides, and she's very knowledgeable and very helpful, and she can sort of help you find out what level of checks you're eligible for. And there's a web link there with more information. Like I said, when I get DBS queries, I always go to Georgie because, you know, that is her area of expertise. Okay. So that's that. So duty of care. Okay. So obviously every organisation has a duty of care towards volunteers, irrespective of what age they are. And obviously you can be liable if a volunteer is injured in your organisation if the duty of care was not met. So again, it's thinking about steps to take to make sure that you reduce the likelihood and potential serious injury to any of your young volunteers. So obviously a lot of this we've already covered, or you'll have covered through implementing the steps we've talked about. giving the volunteers the right information. So part of that is talking about what their role is, what their expectation is, giving them some training and an induction, making sure, you know, if they need safety clothing, if they need PPE or anything like that, that you're giving them that and you're providing it and you're supervising them closely. So if you implement the 5 steps we talked about earlier, then you'll be meeting your legal duty of care to keep them safe. Okay, so another legal requirement that you do need liability insurance. Okay, and it's really important to check that you're covered for under 18s, because I find quite a lot that insurance policies will cover volunteers, but you'll need extra level of cover for under 18s, or you'll need to make them aware that you're having under 18s to check that they'll cover you. So it's really important to make sure you've got that in place, because obviously if they're injured or anything happens in your organisation and you're not covered for that, you obviously, you know, you're going to be come unstuck. So make sure that that's in place. So check your policy. If it doesn't say it on there, phone your insurance company to double check. And also make sure that it covers that they're volunteering with you. So it might be you phone and they say, oh yeah, young staff are covered, but you need to specifically say, oh no, we're not going to be paying them. They're going to be volunteering and they're under 18. So make that really clear that that's covered. It might be, if they are covered, that there's extra stipulations that the insurer will put in place. So again, you need to make sure that you're following whatever they've asked you to do. Obviously, if you contact your current insurer and they won't cover you for that, it might be you have to contact an insurance broker to try and get that specialist cover for under 18s. Okay, so it's really important to make sure you've got that in place to protect the young person, but also to protect your organisation as a whole. Because if you get sued, you know, that could cost goodness knows how much money for your organisation. So it's making sure that that's in place. Okay, so connected to what we've talked about so far, legally organisations using volunteers should have a health and safety policy. So I would hope you've already got some kind of health and safety policy. So it's just making sure that you've got that and that's kept updated, because that's a legal requirement under the Health and Safety at Work Act. So obviously health and safety responsibilities and requirements must be observed and made known to all volunteers. So like I said earlier, making sure that your young volunteers have a bit of a health and safety induction. That will obviously cover you under that legislation. Okay. So connected to that is another piece of legislation, which is the Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. So again, employers or organisations have a responsibility to ensure volunteers are not exposed to risk due to lack of experience, being unaware of existing or potential risks, or lack of maturity. So again, that's going back to getting to know your volunteers, getting to know their level of understanding, and making sure if they don't understand something, or that if they're unsure, that you're educating them on that. So part of that is through your supervision, part of that is through your induction. So again, this links in with your risk assessment we've talked about earlier. Consider the workplace layout. Where are the risks to that young person when they're in? How are they going to handle any equipment? And again, that's going back to that physical and psychological capacity, because remember, what's easy for you isn't going to be easy for them. So again, you've got your risk assessment that will cover you under the Health and Safety at Work Act. Okay. So that's, like I said, that's the legislation. We're getting on to the sort of the last section now. So you're following your legislation and guidance. You've got your safeguarding policy. You've implemented your safer working practices by having an induction, by having training, by having support and supervision. You've done your risk assessments. You've got your parental consent in place. Great. You've got your defined job role. So the young person is starting with you now, and they're continuing to volunteer, getting on really well. Wonderful. However, young people, you know, have a lot of challenges and things to deal with in this day and age. So another part of your role is thinking about what resources are a person with perhaps a specific need that, you know, hasn't necessarily arisen in them volunteering with you, but perhaps through discussions in that supervision and support, they've, you know, disclosed that they're struggling with perhaps their mental health, or perhaps they're struggling with their identity, perhaps they feel they need some counselling. So it's just thinking about having the knowledge of kind of what other organisations are out there, might be able to support that young person, and it's being able to signpost that young person to the different types of support that are available. So I'm just going to talk about a few things that are available in Norfolk that are aimed at young people. And then it's thinking about how you would then give that information to young volunteers. It might be you create a sort of booklet, sort of sources of support for young people. Perhaps you'll have it in the staff room. Perhaps you'll have it in a welcome pack for the young person, or have it on the notice board so it's there if they want to consult it, they can, without perhaps making it a big deal. It's sort of deciding what you think would be relevant. Okay, so it's just sort of making you aware. We're really lucky in Norfolk. There's a lot of organisations out there that can help children and young people with a variety of issues. So I'm just going to briefly talk about what's there. Obviously, if you know any others, feel free to ping them in the chat, because like I said, things keep changing. It's sometimes hard to keep up with what's out there. So this is a relatively new one. This hasn't been out overly long, so it's FYI, and it's a website aimed at children aged 11 to 24 who want information and guidance on self-care, well-being or health advice. And they actually get health advice from a local team. They can create an account and they can access free learning and free webinars on different things connected to health. And obviously we know our young people like to obviously access things online. So again, that's just making you aware that that's a new thing that's out there from the NHS in Norfolk. Okay, so then we've got another one. So then we've got another one from the NHS, which is Chat Health. So again, this is probably an appealing one for young people because they can send a text and then they can get confidential support on a whole range of issues listed there. So health worries, sexual health, mental health, bullying, relationships, alcohol and drugs, smoke and vaping, school worries, self-harm, contraception, because you've got to think your young people are still going to be in education. It might be they're having problems in school, and it might be that they open up to tell you that, perhaps in support and supervision. And then obviously it's letting them know that there's support out there they can access. Okay, so this one's for 11 to 19-year-olds. Again, Norfolk, Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. They can do it by text, and there is more information on the website. So again, it could be, you print out these couple of posters, put on your notice board. Could be something like that. Okay, so then we've got some others. So we've got COOF, which is another good one. So that's for 11 to 25-year-olds. So again, some of these also cover older age range. So if you have volunteers over 18, again, there's no harm in sharing these. So again, help and advice, and they offer online counselling, which is really good. So obviously, when we talked about earlier, if a young person had a disclosure made to them, they might benefit from some kind of counselling. So obviously COOF does offer that. So again, there's a website, and 7 days a week until 10. So a really good service. Again, if there's specific issues, MAP, again, is able to provide advice for 11 to 25-year-olds. Free and confidential support. They do housing, money and mental health. So again, it could be your young person, is having problems at home, with the housing situations and, wanting to see what they can do. So it's just thinking about all the different sort of types of issues young people might be experiencing and where they can get support, because, they might not have access to this information, but you can pass that on to them. So we've got Mind. So that's support for mental health and emotional difficulties for 11 to 18-year-olds in Great Yarmouth. Suffolk Foundation Trust, again, another one for mental health support, and they actually have a team for 0 to 13-year-olds and then one for 14 to 25. So again, it's just knowing, and obviously just knowing what's out there, because I think, definitely in the role I used to do before this one, when I was working up in CADS, we would see so many requests for support for young people who needed mental health services, and I'm sure you probably experienced that a lot in the roles that you're doing. And it's nice to see that there is support out there that they can access for free. It's just getting that knowledge out there. Okay, so then obviously we've got the LGBTQ+ project. and they offer some wonderful support for young people. And that's an area that's coming up quite a lot in the news with sort of hate crime attacks on young people. So again, that's quite a topical one. Obviously, we've got the Matthew Project. I believe we might have had someone in the chat for the Matthew Project. Obviously, they provide support about substance misuse, drugs and alcohol. Again, free support to access for that. Then obviously, if you've got any young people who are suffering from the loss of a loved one, going through bereavement, obviously Nelson's Journey is really good for that. And then obviously the Rose Project, obviously if they've been affected by child exploitation, they can support with that. And then the last one is obviously Childline. So you can actually download some really helpful posters from Childline what are free, and then perhaps you could have them on the notice board what gives the number to obviously offer free support. And obviously probably Childline might have been the one that the young people might have heard of most, because they do advertise that on the TV, don't they? So I guess now thinking about those different sources of support we've talked about, what are your sort of ideas on how you think you could share this information perhaps with young volunteers? You know, what might you do with it?
You could build it in as sort of resources at the end of an induction pack or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone do anything slightly different, or?
We have like the organisations which have little information leaflets and cards. We have those around at our groups anyway.
Fantastic.
Our young volunteers are generally volunteering with our youth groups, so they're things that we have around for our service users. So they'd be accessible to our volunteers as well.
Yeah. Well, out of interest, Alice, was there anything there you hadn't heard of?
No, I don't think so. No.
No. If anybody's got any others, obviously, you know, feel free to share in the chat as well. Have it on display as a static item in physical spaces too, so always accessible. Yeah, great idea, Fiona. Scott, put in the induction pack. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so I think it's just making you aware that, you know, if a young person comes to you, you know, during the volunteering, you know, and comes to you with issues, you know, and they clearly need support, you know, and if it's not within your remit, you know, don't feel that, you know, you have to take that on, but be honest with the young person and say, well, actually, let's have a look through the pack here, or this one would be helpful. Do you want some help? You know, contact them, or are you happy to contact them yourself? So it's making them aware and say, well, actually, these are the experts. I think they would be more helpful, you know, to support you with this. But, you know, we can keep checking in, you know, during our supervisions on how you're getting on. Okay. Information for young carer support is good to have too. Oh, yes, fantastic, Alice. Yes, that's a good point. Perhaps we can find something on that and send out as well, Charlotte, something on young carers.
Yeah, definitely. I can have a look round today.
Carers Matters, Carer Matter Norfolk for Countrywide. Yeah. Yeah, good resources from the NSPCC too. Yeah, definitely, Felma. Yeah, they obviously have a helpline as well. Perfect. Okay, I think we are nearly at the end, and it's time for questions. If anyone's got any questions left.